Hi, welcome back to Cybersecurity for Everyone. I'm Dr. Charles Harry. In our last episode, we talked about hacktivists. And in this episode, I want to talk about a different type of threat actor, the advanced persistent threat. Now recall that threat actors take advantage of specific vulnerability in systems. They leverage their skill and resources to achieve very specific end effects, and they're motivated by different things. So who are the advanced persistent threats? And specifically, we may want to ask ourselves, why do we call it an advanced persistent threat? On a very high level, they're advanced. These are the pros. These are the big leagues of hacking. They're persistent in the sense that they persistently engage with their targets. They're relentless. If there's an objective to be had, they're going to persistently engage against that target. And of course, they remain a threat. These are highly skilled hacking organizations. These are not run-of-the-mill basement hackers. These are folks with deep training and resources. They mostly are tied to nation states or aligned with their geopolitical goals. So these are folks who are aligned with specific governments and who have their training and backing. They leverage highly customized tools, tradecraft, and infrastructure. So let's talk a little bit about their motives. Well, as you might imagine, there are a variety. Their first motive may be espionage. They may want to engage in stealing trade secrets or classified information, or even highly relevant policy information ahead of in the lead up to a very large international conference. They may engage in industrial espionage. There might be a real interest in stealing very specific corporations' trade secrets, things like a secret formula for producing steel. They may also be interested in sabotaging competitors' operations. Additionally, there may be a general interest in engaging in sabotage, the ability for one country to engage in a low-intensity conflict against another, all designed to be a set of operations to achieve a broader set of national objectives. And finally, there may be general support to military operations. So advanced persistent threats may help amplify kinetic military operations. So in addition to flying those bombers and dropping munitions, we may also engage in hacking activity to do things like take down an electrical grid. We can also see APTs utilizing their capabilities to become what we call an asymmetric form of attack in a response to a stronger power. And so if one country has a more dominant military, another country who may want to respond in a kinetic way may not be very successful. However, in cyberspace, they may be more effective. So they do what's called an asymmetric attack. So let's talk a little more about the tools that APTs use. So we see a lot of custom tools. So unlike the hobbyists who are primarily using Kali Linux, or even the hacktivists who use a lot of Kali Linux utilities, custom tools are the name of the game here in APTs. Standard and custom tools for reconnaissance are used. Standard and custom exploitation techniques. This is important. While we see a lot of custom techniques used, it's not like APTs have forgotten a lot of the standard capabilities. And in some cases, standard capabilities may work just fine. But we also see a lot of custom tactics for delivery, to additionally supplement standard techniques. So the idea here is that APTs will use everything at their disposal, not simply the standard tools that everyone else is using, but they'll develop their own, and they'll develop their own tradecraft. So what kind of attacks do we expect to see from an APT? Well, we see deep penetrations into sensitive government and corporate networks, and even their phone systems. We see large-scale disruptive campaigns to cripple critical infrastructure, to do things like take down a power grid. In fact, in the case of the Ukraine, we've seen 2 power events where an APT operation took down power on 2 separate occasions. That's a pretty significant end effect. Finally, we may see acquired information being used as part of a broader disinformation campaign. A lot of the concerns surrounding the 2016 election in the United States centered around the use of information that was acquired from the Democratic National Committee systems. It was seeded with information that was false and then eventually distributed in a disinformation campaign. So, who are some of these groups? So, Fancy Bear, Energetic Bear, Rocket Kitten, Comet Crew, Lazarus Group are all examples of APT organizations that are aligned with different nation states. In the case of Fancy and Energetic Bear, they tend to be aligned with the Russian Federation. Rocket Kitten is associated with the Iranian. Comet Crew is a Chinese organization, and Lazarus Group is affiliated with the North Koreans. So one example, APT-29, goes by several different aliases: Cozy Bear, the Dukes, Grizzly Steppe, and several more. The attributed country of origin here is Russia, the Russian Federation, and it mostly conducts espionage on behalf of that Russian Federation. The targets mostly include Western governments and related NGO organizations, non-government organizations. And they tend to focus initially on kind of a smash and grab, get initial access into the organization and steal as much information as possible. However, if the organization is sensitive enough or important enough, they have the ability to switch over and become very stealthy and maintain persistent access in that organization for quite some time. So some of the national goals that we see APTs achieving are primarily focused around a couple of key industries. Certainly public administration, we see a lot of APT attacks against governments. It makes sense. There is sensitive government information that those APTs may want to obtain. However, in this case, we also see APTs interested in other types of targets. Telecommunications, utilities are all really, really important targets for APTs, especially if they're interested in fighting some sort of asymmetric war. So what are some of the takeaways? Well, first of all, APTs are highly skilled threat actors. These are the pros. These are the best of the best. They are motivated by geopolitical concerns. They are tightly aligned with nation states and their agendas. They're able to conduct complex cyber attacks that can persist for a long period of time. They focus on stealing information from governments as well as corporations, but can also engage in sabotage and support to military operations. And we find APT hacking groups all over the world. In our next module, we're going to explore the process of hacking. We're going to disentangle this term that is oftentimes thrown around in popular media. I hope to see you next time.